inclusive. So in the session, we will focus on large corporates in the private sector. So Karen Cohen will moderate the panel to discuss especially the shift in procurement policies, new practices to encourage a diverse sourcing, how to build relationship with buyers and procurement leaders, and the practices to engage corporate leaders to consider policy advancement to make the supplier channel diverse, inclusive, and reduce discrimination with women. So I want to introduce Karen Cohen. She's on the advisory board of startups in high tech and fintech and venture partner with the Master Fund, really focused on women founders. Previously, Karen had responsibility on multiple corporate boards, multiple corporate budgets in the role of GM at Microsoft, Worldwide Financial Services. She was a CEO and board director of an advisory research firm, Tower Group, and as a general manager at Gartner and a member of Gartner International Board. So at Gartner, Karen also led a software asset management interest group known as Swami, which provided a voice to procurement leads for both users and providers of technology. And Karen started her career at IBM, where she held multiple international assignments. Today, you're in for a treat with Karen and all the amazing board of the panelists. So Karen, please come on and take the stage. Just do mic on, camera on, you will take the stage.
Greetings, everyone. So delighted to be here. Chaitra, thank you for the introduction. Much appreciated. I just want to add one thing. I'm going to introduce the panelists, and we have an amazing panel. But I also want to say we're going to focus intentionally on the private sector and on the mid-size and larger corporates as the buyers. And a bit on the early stage growth companies and the mid-sized companies more as the suppliers. So we're trying to get that balance. We could be much broader, but time doesn't allow that. So let me start. Chaitra mentioned that I started my career with IBM, so I think I'd like to introduce an IBMer as the first panelist introduction. And we have some tremendous people on the panel. I'd like to start with Avaritis Mainsa, who is the general manager of IBM's service and industry vertical cloud ecosystem. In this role, he's responsible for working across IBM's ecosystem, especially with independent software vendors, ISVs, and global systems integrators. His purpose is to enable them to drive value for their clients, their customers, through IBM's hybrid cloud with AI and a variety of industry-specific cloud platforms. Avaritis has held a number of senior executive roles in IBM, including assistant treasurer, wow, general auditor, scary, and GM of client financing, which is the IBM captive financing unit. He is also the co-chair of the IBM Black Executive Council, who's working to improve representation, engagement, and impact for diverse talent at IBM. So Avaritis, thank you so much for joining us. As our second panelist, we have Bria Starmer. Now, Bria comes from the other end of the spectrum. Bria is the founder and president of Lions and Tigers, an agency helping organizations move into the future by tapping into part-time and flexible consultants, which is one of the most inclusive hiring models in the market. Bria founded the firm after being laid off from a startup when she was 7 months pregnant. Wow. And 2 years into this business, she now supports more than 100 micro entrepreneurs to gain access to enterprise and emerging tech brand projects in a variety of spaces, including marketing, operations, and change management. Bree is an amazing example of a small woman-owned supplier who has had success in advocating for her community, and as a result is seeing her business double year over year while giving birth to her third child just recently. So glad you can participate, Bria.
Thanks.
And if you have to take a break for one of those kids, we understand.
Thanks.
So, then we have another IBMer, which is fortunate, Jason Mudd. Jason is the executive leader for IBM's Source to Pay organization, which works with clients on accounts payable and procurement. Jason has experienced career advancement in a series of increasingly accountable leadership roles at IBM. This includes business transformation, information technology, source to pay, supply chain, and consulting. Jason has enhanced business operations and developed strategies, facilitated changes that have positively affected enterprise performance and outcomes. He also has a wealth of knowledge in global transformation, information technology, supply chain integration, and consulting, working with a variety of external and internal clients. So I'm sure Jason will bring a valuable perspective. Now, last but not least, we have Lawrence Kane. And Lawrence is responsible for strategic sourcing, functional excellence at Boeing. And I went a bit out of order, so Lawrence is the second from the right in your slide. He's a member of the International Association of Outsourcing Professionals, which is a think tank generally known as IAOP. I'm not sure how that acronym is pronounced, but he's also on the advisory board of SIG, which is the Sourcing Industry Group University, which certifies sourcing and risk leaders, as well as on the IAOP training and certification commitment, where Lawrence helped create many of the industry's leading practices, and he regularly advances thought leadership as a keynote and breakout speaker at conferences. I have to add, and I don't want to embarrass Lawrence, but I'm going to add that he was inducted into the SIG Sourcing Supernova Hall of Fame, woo, in 2018 for inspiring, insightful, and innovative work in strategic sourcing and procurement over the course of his career. So welcome all of you, and I look forward to hearing all of your insights. And I think what I'm going to do is start with Bria for my first question. Bria, if that's good.
Yep.
As I just said, you founded a company focused on women faced with hiring discrimination. And you've been bringing talented and experienced women back into the workforce. As the founder and president of an early stage growth company, are you and the women-led firms which you advise finding it difficult to get contracts with corporations? So what do you see are and if yes, what are the primary blockers you're seeing? And can you share some thoughts on what those blockers are and what we might need to reduce them?
Yeah, thanks, Karen. I really appreciate the question, and hopefully I can articulate where many of us are coming from the small business perspective or startup perspective. So I was thinking about this question a lot, and there are a few things that I would note as barriers for founders like me who are trying to advocate for either their solution or their service in these enterprise spaces. So number one, access to decision makers. So this is about networking. This is about using the power of our collective energy to try to access the people who have budget and decision-making authority. That alone is very difficult. Not everyone is as skilled at trying to find and hunt for those decision makers. Two, and I was talking with Lawrence about this last week, is the knowledge of culturally appropriate business development. every organization has a way in which it's appropriate to reach out to someone. Some organizations, you can pick up a phone and call them. Other organizations, you need to use email or chat or LinkedIn, or perhaps there's in-person opportunities. So that's all very nuanced that we need to be really respectful of and, of course, compliant with. 3, there are getting through layers of suppliers. So sometimes we can go direct. I have a direct relationship with my firm for Google and T-Mobile and Microsoft and others, but there are lots of other organizations where there's multiple suppliers you have to work through. So that's another challenge that you have to be able to understand and negotiate. And then, of course, once you're through and working with procurement, there are certainly requirements on our business, such as insurance holdings, diversity of clientele we need to hold, the way in which we procure our own talent, like what percentage of business or folks that are coming along as 1099 or W-2, all of these things matter in what we'll be able to give in terms of access. And sometimes we even have to have diverse supplier requirements, number of people of color or number of women in leadership roles. All of that has to be accounted for and reported when we're having these relationships set up. Okay, so all of that, then there's still others that, such as like natural and unintended bias that happens in the systems that we're up against. I'll just give you a quick example, Karen. You mentioned that, I bring forward, especially women and a lot of parents, that's kind of our specialty, into these kinds of flexible and fractional work engagements. And so I had a client ask for an executive communications consultant, part-time, but she needed someone that was going to be available at 5 p.m. every day. And I said, well, that takes me out. Like, I've got 3 young kids under 5. So, it wasn't intended to be a situation of bias, but in that moment, she was excluding everyone with young children. And so there are many examples like this where we're fighting up against a system that wasn't built for us, that we're trying to rewrite. So anyway, those are 5 different scenarios of barriers that we're all kind of trying to change. And through allies like we have on this panel, and through thought leaders that we have here, I know that we'll be able to make some inroads so that we can carve out these niches for ourselves.
That's great, Maria. I think those 5 points of blockers are probably top line or top of mind for a lot of people, and I think I'm gonna pick those apart, and I'm actually going to be asking the panelists to address some of these. But I'm going to start with Avaritis and the point you made about getting through layers of suppliers, and Avaritis. You lead and build a lot of partners and a lot of suppliers as part of the ecosystem that you manage. With this experience, what are some of the practices and actions that could happen with these layers of suppliers and partners that you work with that could help develop an inclusive ecosystem and bring in more businesses led by women, but also a range of ethnicities and race?
Thank you very much, Karen, for that. So I'm delighted to be here and to share some of our own experience. And IBM has had a supplier diversity program since 1968, right? And it currently covers women, ethnic minorities, people with disabilities, LGBTQ. And so for us, we think of that as a business imperative. We like other companies to think about it the same. And so let me start by explaining, of course, that good supplier diversity is good business. Right? Your suppliers will become a competitive differentiator for you. Diverse suppliers, they're actually more responsive, they are innovative, they add value to your supply chain, right? They make you more competitive. And I think, as we said earlier on, I think, Karen, you mentioned this, and Bria as well, governments and many customers actually require proposals to include diverse spending reporting, right? So as you go out and you talk to companies, it's important that you remember that. Your customers recognize the importance of diversity in their workforce, and frankly, they want to see that in their suppliers as well. So the companies that you approach, you need to approach with that mindset, knowing that actually you're there to help them, right? And so you should be pleased that you're helping create jobs. So if you're a company looking to hire, startups, women-led companies, you're helping to change lives. And often these are local jobs as well. So you're basically supporting the local community. Now, now we see that this is really critical. I think it's important that you really start with goals. So if you want to set up a diversity program, you assess your current and your future state, and you determine the level of corporate commitment that you're prepared to make. Because this is just another business imperative, right? You need to align your policies, you need to align your procedures, you need to align your contracts, right? You don't want to throw a 300-page supplier contract at a 6-woman startup. And often, and this really can be very intimidating, right? It's useful if you establish tiers. So you have some tier 1s that may be your larger companies, and you have tier 2s that are smaller companies, and you could actually introduce the tier 2s to the tier 1s, right? So that you can increase their breadth. And we ask companies to really be intentional, right? Use analytics, broaden your contacts and your connections to engage more suppliers. And finally, to integrate this into your management system. So just make it a program. And then you need to nurture it. Right? So at IBM, for example, we run training workshops, we run education sessions, we have mentoring programs where we work with smaller suppliers to help them understand how to navigate, again, what can be very, very intimidating. And we put out a video recently celebrating our 50th anniversary. Part of that actually is to promote and encourage more diverse suppliers to contact us, right? And you can go to the IBM website. So I would say if you're coming in, first of all, as a company, right, you need to do this. This is good business. And if you're coming in as a potential supplier, you need to reach out and know that they need you to help them out. And for companies that set up this program, the important thing is to think of this as a journey. It's not done once you set it up. You need to water it, you need to look after it, you need to learn from it, and then you need to continue to improve it.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because what you mentioned about training and advising, I think is really key. I mean, Bria mentioned that there was a lack of knowledge on how to deal with these areas. One thing just quickly that I'm curious about before I move on to the next question, though, is you mentioned different tiers of contracts. Is that must be challenging to do, but I would imagine that's really important. Is it any sort of advice? How can you create different tiers that say, I'm going to have a smaller, simpler contract for a small business than I do for a larger corporation?
Yeah, it's really thinking about because there's certain things when you're doing business that you want to make sure that you manage from a risk perspective. And so if you're thinking about the size of the contract and the risk that I'm trying to manage, then there's certain terms you can ask yourself whether you really do need those terms, whether there are other ways in which you can secure confidence that both sides will deliver what they said they were going to deliver without dramatically increasing the size of what you do. And actually, if you move to click-through contracts also, and you make them honest and straightforward in plain English, it's easier for startup companies to come read your terms, because if they have to go hire a huge lawyer just to come and sign up, because they're signing up to become a supplier, they've not won the business yet. It can really significantly add to the cost of doing business, and so it's really important, we think, to look at it like that.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'd like actually to jump over to Jason and sort of touch on the point that Bria made about access to decision makers and getting through those layers. You advise a lot of corporations on their procurement strategies and processes, Jason. Who are the key stakeholders? And what are their roles to consider as one tries to build out a more robust corporate budget inclusively?
Thank you. Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Karen. I do appreciate the opportunity to be with the team tonight. And what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to unpack this. Like you said, Bria talked about it from I'll call it outside in point of view. I'm going to look at it from an inside out point of view. And so it's extremely important to understand, as you mentioned, the roles and relationships required to build that, what I'm going to call, very robust and inclusive relationship. There's really two levels to consider as you explore, how to, get your foot in the door, so to speak. And so level one is just on understanding the macro level, understanding the companies that you're working with, the companies that you're exploring, the companies that you're interested in doing business with, understanding, what is their tops down support look like? What is, from a C-suite perspective, some of their policies and practices. And I'll tell you that, timing right now is extremely engaging, important, because most companies, especially companies like IBM and other blue chip companies, are very outwardly speaking and advocates right now around ensuring that diverse supplier relationships are strategic and key to their business imperatives. And so the first stakeholder from a macro level is really your senior leadership, and understanding, once again, that the commitment, what their vision is, how they are, for example, inviting and welcoming suppliers into their strategy. Now, the second level is what I'm going to call the micro level. And that is kind of what Bria talked about from a outside in perspective. And that is the bottoms up support and the actual approach within the walls of a company. And I'll use IBM, for example. There's really three actors that you need to consider and think about from both a role and relationship perspective. Number one is understanding, what business units you want to work with. Obviously, when you talk about cloud, for example, you want to ensure that, have you created any relationships with that business unit that owns those, commodity sets within your space, and understanding what that looks like. Then also, once that relationship's created, then understanding with intentionality, how to collaborate, how to, really drive down to what I'm going to say the decision makers, because typically the business units are the areas that really own the budget and drive the decision making for how to allocate those budgets. So very important to understand the business units. Second actor is really around procurement itself, and in fact, IBM supplier diversity function actually reports to me. And one of the key functions that we're really focused on now, working with business units, is really our role and goal is to facilitate data, right? To ensure that there's visibility across the supplier base, and the business units understand with intentionality where the opportunities are. We also help facilitate those RFX events, right? Ensuring that the right level of suppliers that really reflect the marketplace have an opportunity to have a seat at the table. And then also, and Everest mentioned this earlier, contracts. So procurement and supplier diversity are continuously looking at how do we streamline, simplify the contracts for both tier, first tier, second tier, how to flow through, pass throughs, etc. And then the last actor in the equation that you absolutely want to be aware of is an extremely important persona, which is, I'm going to call it your own persona. Being a supplier / business owner, there's when I talk to our suppliers, there's three things that I'm always very crisp on and very intentional on. And that's number one is that always lead with your value proposition. What does your competitiveness look like, right? So when that RFX event comes up, or that business unit is exploring an opportunity, you're extremely competitive. Also, the certification, so that you can streamline. Everest talked about supplier onboarding. So there's things that you can do to really help with the speed of how to become a certified supplier that onboards with companies. And then last but not least is just the relationships in general. As you build those relationships with procurement and supplier diversity, the business units, etc. And so once again, those macro relationships and micro relationships, understanding, how they all fit into the equation.
Wow. That's an incredible amount of valuable information. I guess the one thing that runs through my mind is what's the responsibility of the corporation to get that information out to the supplier community? Yeah.
So I mean, it is a key imperative and I'll take it from both levels. So at a macro level, and like I said, the timing right now is amazing. Pretty much, every blue chip company that has a social conscious and awareness has published, either through Twitter or, you name it. We've done it through Twitter. We've done it through LinkedIn to say, hey, here's our supplier diversity program. Here's the initiative we're trying to do. Here's, the type of suppliers we're looking for. So I think that overall communication at the corporate level, but then also at the business unit level, as well as the, supplier diversity itself. We have been very intentional with our market intelligence, identifying new suppliers to bring to the business units for consideration. And so our role and goal is, hey, if there is a good supplier out there that we're not working with and we feel our business units could benefit from that supplier, then we need to bring them to the table to be considered.
Yeah, I think it's an excellent point, Jason. I know that when I was owned large budgets, sometimes I'd find highly innovative suppliers, but I had difficulty bringing them in because of certain procurement requirements. Insurance, for example, they couldn't afford or they couldn't get the insurance that was mandated by Microsoft or mandated by Gartner or IBM or any of the firms that I work with. And so I think with that, I'm going to go over to Lawrence. Lawrence, you're recognized as a visionary leader in strategic sourcing and procurement. Can you share with us what changes you've seen in procurement policies and practices, if any, to encourage diverse sourcing and some of the things that people have been talking about on the panel?
Absolutely. And thanks for inviting me. I appreciate the opportunity to be part of this. There's a lot of things that are happening. And I think the challenge is every large company, well, every company for that matter, understands the importance of a social responsibility policy, of which supplier diversity is usually part of it. And there's a program, and there's measures, and there's metrics, right? The challenge is that for a lot of suppliers, especially the smaller, fast-growing companies, it's very hard to get in. I'll just give you a quick example. The company I work for, we are large, we're multinational, we're highly regulated. We're very complex. We operate in, I think, 48 states and 120 countries, something like that. And we have all these rules around data sovereignty and around export controls and compliance and, just mass variety of stuff, right? It can literally cost over $1 million to bid on one of our RFPs. Well, that's not going to work for an emerging company. Bree and I were talking, and she mentioned making the first $1 million deal. Well, great, but you can't invest that kind of money to get in. So what I always recommend, and what I've seen a lot of folks in industry, I've got 60 some odd CPOs I talk to and a bunch of other sourcing and procurement leaders. And what we try to do is we look at the supply base. We do something called stratification. So there's sort of your strategic innovation partners or strategic type suppliers, whatever you call them, and a bunch of other categories. And the idea is that those that are the big, complex companies have the supplier ecosystem of big, complex companies. Like IBM is one of our suppliers, as an example. Well, they can handle us. We're high maintenance. That's okay, right? But what we do is, if you're going to be a strategic partner, you have a responsibility to help carry out that supplier diversity program, which means you're going to find opportunities within your supplier ecosystem to bring people in. You're going to handle that administrative burden. You're going to handle some of that overhead and insurance and indemnification, limitation liability. I mean, we pay net 120. Most small businesses can't handle that, but the strategic companies can. They can do the float and they can pay their folks, you know, in their ecosystem that need it, net 30 or 20 or whatever it is, right? So there's a huge value in having those strategic suppliers who get things like access to key thought leaders and C-suite members, who get sometimes directed buys that they don't actually have to bid on, you know, that get some special perks to be that mentor and that driver of bringing in those innovative suppliers to flesh out their ecosystem, to bring us innovation. And I say us, I'm talking about the industry, not any particular company, but just large companies generally, right? To get that innovation in there and to really champion bringing in diversity into the role and helping to grow those companies. I'll give you just a really fast real life example. This is public, so I can talk about it. 20 some odd years ago, there was a company called WWT, which stood for Worldwide Technologies, which is a really aspirational name for a company that was like, you know, a dozen people working out of a warehouse in St. Louis. Well, they partnered up with one of our strategic suppliers, became an important part of that ecosystem. They were mentored, they helped, were grown, and today, you know, 20 some odd years later, they're a multi-billion-dollar company. And guess what? They have an ecosystem of suppliers who do exactly the same thing. We love seeing those success stories where somebody's bringing others along with them. And, you know, so they went from being a small, diverse, minority-owned company to being a gigantic company. Great, right? And then bring up the next wave. And so that's the kind of thing that really helps. You know, you can have direct contracts with small companies. You can have direct contracts with some large companies, but when you start getting into the massive players, especially those that have that huge level of regulatory oversight and kind of administrative burden, that's when you really need to partner up with somebody. And so that's a emerging theme. And you see it not just in corporate policies, but also you mentioned SIG, right? The Sourcing Industry Group. One of the things that SIG does, and SIG, by the way, is a woman-owned business, as well as a consortium and kind of an industry focus group. So we got a whole bunch of procurement folks. It's about 70% buy side. There's some advisory and a little sell side that's involved. And they created something called the Innovation Incubator. So the idea was, in this particular case, it was affinity around procurement technology, and brought in a bunch of small growing companies like Tealbook, another woman-owned enterprise, Scout RFP when they first came out. Some of you may have heard of them, and others. And the idea is bring in those folks and do a showcase and tell those of us who are buying things about them. Because if we go to a Gartner or a Forrester or an ISG or whatever and look for the normal research, a lot of these emerging companies are too small. They're not covered yet, right? And so that way we can make a forum in an industry conference for those folks to come to us, let us know what they're doing. You know, maybe we can't go direct. Maybe it's through one of our suppliers. Maybe it's somebody on the radar for later on. But it helps to grow that diverse, very important aspect of our supply chain and our supplier ecosystem.
Yeah. I'm seeing a bit of a theme here, Lawrence, from what you mentioned and also from what Avarsys mentioned, which is opening up the idea of perhaps having different sets of terms for different size companies. Do you think, Lawrence, procurement would be open to something like that?
I think so, but it depends on the company, right? So we're not all equal. So, I mean, if I was to hand you my terms and conditions and you give it to your attorney, you'd probably need smelling salts to pick her up off the floor afterwards, right? It's just, I mean, but we don't have a choice because of the regulatory burden we're under, right? And that's, again, why that supplier ecosystem helps, because I might have to hold, you know, an IBM or a Microsoft or whatever accountable to those things. But they can take that risk to pass it through or not pass it through. And so that's where you have the opportunity. We do, most people I talk to, the statement of work is written in everyday English because not only is it better, you don't need lawyers, right? But terms and conditions tend to be pretty lawyeristic, and assuming that's actually a word. But the point is that, you know, there are some things that are just deal breakers for certain large companies. So if you're looking at pharma, if you're looking at financial services, if you're looking at aerospace and defense, I mean, anybody who's really highly regulated, especially as multinational, we're not going to get the approval to give different terms to the smaller companies directly. But that doesn't mean we can't do it, because there's a lot of way, you know, I like to say everything's negotiable as a procurement guy. Mostly everything's negotiable, but sometimes you got to get a little bit creative. And so that's where we can work with our supplier ecosystem to provide those opportunities where maybe we don't have to flow things through directly. It's a tough one for those, you know, call them Fortune 100 size companies. When you start getting into the really big, but maybe just US or just UK or just, you know, one regional area, it's a lot easier. You start getting much less regulatory burden, even in those industries that have a lot of oversight.
Yeah, no, I think it's tough, but I think what you're saying is to some degree you have to do partnerships or subcontractors. But Avartis, you're the owner of a large corporate budget. What actions do you think needs to be taken to encourage, and perhaps, or maybe I need to say allow, more diverse suppliers or smaller suppliers to respond to your requests for proposals?
Well, I think, you know, just as large companies work to establish supplier diversity programs, I think the companies also need to do some work, right? So if you're a startup trying to work with large companies for the first time, it can be a little intimidating. Lawrence laid this out very clearly. And in fact, this idea of tier ones and tier twos, and, you know, Lawrence referred to strategic, right? You can have your tier ones or your strategic. They know the drill. They can afford the lawyers. They can sign the 300-page document. And then you encourage them to say, you got to go work with diverse suppliers, and they bring a range of diverse suppliers who do little pieces. The different pieces may require different terms and conditions, right? Because ultimately, you still want to treat all of your suppliers equally, right? So we're focused on making sure that you have a diverse population, but you're still going to treat your suppliers equally. So it's an important thing to remember that. So for example, if you wanted to do business with IBM, you know, we require suppliers to sign up and comply with the Responsible Business Alliance Code of Conduct, right? A lot of companies do, right? Because you know, these are, you know, in the terms that are a set of social, environmental, and ethical industry standards. We comply with them. We want the suppliers to comply to them. And once you've done that, you need to make sure that you prepare your company profile, right? You don't just show up with your bank statement for 3 months, right? We're going to go check your Dun & Bradstreet report, or you give us 3 years of financials, because sometimes you don't have Dun & Bradstreet reports. And then you do your application online. I mean, there are no guarantees, but it's a pretty simple, straightforward application, because you're basically saying, I am real, this is my value proposition, I work in this area, and I would like to do business with you, right? In most cases, you know, that will get approved pretty quickly. But then there is a fourth step that you need to do, which is basically to indicate that you're a minority supplier, right? So, and then then we're going to go take you through, we're going to go put you through the program. And again, it's no use treating everybody the same when the playing field is tilted one way, which is why all of the mentoring and all of the support is designed basically to tilt the playing field back straight, so that, again, nobody wants favors, everybody just wants a straight playing field, which is why the mentoring and the support that Lawrence talked about is so important. Then I think a few things that I think really worth emphasizing. Make sure that you answer the questions, right? As I said, for Lawrence's company, my company is the same. We're very strict. We make sure that you answer everything. Make sure that you show passion for what you do, right? Know your value. Highlight the advantages that you think you're going to bring. Partner with other diverse-owned organizations. Maybe they're in tier one. Maybe they're in the same tier as you, but between you cover bigger areas, because you can imagine a company of IBM size. We don't want to go and issue, you know, 6 different purchase orders because we're going to do business in 6 states. We'd like to issue 1 purchase order. And if you're a startup, you may not be able to fulfill that. So if you can link up and combine with others that are diverse entities, that helps. Or if you can use a strategic supplier as a way to expand your reach, that's important. I think Brea talked about, you know, certification. You know, you may need to go certify that your business is diverse. There are government agencies that do that, various other associations that do that. This is the basic stuff. Make sure that you have this. And then I say, finally, you need to be confident. Right, you know, these companies, they have to know that they can count on you, right? They want to know that if you say you're going to supply this component of this quality, that they're going to get that component of that quality, or that code of that quality. And yes, you're small, but indicate that you're ready to box above your weight, and that you're just looking for the opportunity to really go serve out and impress them. So next time they give you more of the pie.
I have a question I'm anxious to ask Jason as well as Lawrence, but I think at this point I just got to circle back to Bria for a minute. And Bria, how are you reacting to what you're hearing? I don't want to put words in your mouth.
I love this idea of punching above your weight class. That gets me fired up. I'm like, okay, let's go. In some ways, this you gentlemen give me an exhale. I think you see me. There's this wonderful allyship and mentorship that I see coming out of this group, and so that feels really encouraging. At the same time, my anxiety raises when I think about the number of hurdles we still have to go through. And of course, we have to do that. Of course, you all have very big responsibilities in your work, and you need to shepherd your resources appropriately too. So I think you set our expectations well around what it takes to do business with world-class organizations like yours. And I think that's fair. It still means that there's a lot for us to do. I went and talked to my finance team because I said, what have we spent on this in the last year? Like, what does this cost us in terms of people hours and in dollars? And I run about a 7-figure consulting business, and we spent about $66,000 in the last year just managing these relationships, having certifications. My legal fees definitely have gone up, 800% year over year. And so as we keep getting to a new weight class, I think I now better understand the requirements of us as we continue to rise. So thank you for setting that so clearly out for us.
Jason, you had mentioned that AI and data analytics, that frankly, that at IBM Source to Pay, you're using AI and data analytics to provide more procurement insights and remove some of these unknown biases. Do you think cognitive and AI processes could help allocate budgets more inclusively? Is there a way to automate some of this to help?
Absolutely. And at IBM and just in general, we like to look at it as what I'm going to call good AI and cognitive technology, especially in the procurement space. There's really two core dimensions I like to talk about is around transparency and visibility. And to me, from a value perspective, when you're talking about good AI and cognitive technology, those two are extremely important. From an underlining perspective, what I would like to share is the following, is that from a corporate responsibility standpoint, you got to really look at curating, what does your data footprint look like? Others on the panel have talked quite a bit about, the market intelligence, the ability to identify a supply and demand opportunity, a supplier that really could meet a demand of, say, for example, a business unit. I think also that one of the underlining aspects for a good AI is really a company taking a look at, scrubbing its policies and practices to make sure that they're not building their AI and cognitive platforms on policies and practices that may have, underlying, biases in them, right? And so it's extremely important to make sure that you're doing that good AI on good policies and practices. And finally, really making sure that processes are simplified and that the actors that I talked about earlier are very clear about how to, really use that data and ensure that policies and practices are appropriately handled throughout the process and working with suppliers. And then I'll just kind of end on this. For example, one of the key AI initiatives that we're actually partnering in a very large consortium is around what we call Trust Your Supplier. And Trust Your Supplier is a consortium of about 30 major blue chip companies that are creating a what I'm going to call a digital platform. And this digital platform, and Everest and Lawrence and talked about, the importance of showing up, the importance of how to onboard, and this Trust Your Supplier digital identity allows you to create it once and then share it across multiple companies and platforms to streamline the awareness and the onboarding process. So absolutely good AI and cognitive technologies allow for, once again, that transparency and visibility around how to sync up supply and demand from a supplier and company point of view.
Okay, well, Lawrence, as you listen to this, you're a leader in the procurement function, so you're often the creator and the enforcer of procurement policies. So, what changes do you think are viable for corporations to make in order to have more inclusive or to be more inclusive in terms of corporate budgets? And do you see the heads of procurement leaders, do you see the heads of sourcing and procurement acting as leaders in these initiatives? What's viable and who's in charge?
Great question. So, part of the challenge of procurement, and especially in like an engineering centric company, is it's all about data. Right. And Jason touched on it a little bit. You got to have the right data to be able to manage that supplier ecosystem and to track your governance, your operational performance management, contract change management, all those things. The policy things that can help or hurt sometimes has to do with how do you characterize the value that a diverse company brings. So remember, we all know that customers will pay more if your values are tied with their values, right? I work for a company that makes a product that's only sold to other businesses. I mean, we have a lot of products, but most people aren't going to go buy a $300 or $500 million airplane. But we do a lot of advertising, and we advertise things like we have green airplanes that are going to be 100% biofuel, right? Things like that. Why do we do that? Well, we do that because there's a perception of value of having alignment in, what we believe in and what you believe in, the same thing. Well, that needs to get into a business case, right? So when you want to make supplier diversity real, one of the things you need to do is have a way to weight the value of having that diverse supply chain against the cost of managing it. Because if you think about it, the more suppliers you have, the more it costs to manage your supply base. The less suppliers, right? The inverse of that. Well, sometimes that drives companies to decisions which, while they are looking for diverse suppliers, there's kind of the sweet spot, right? And it's a sweet spot narrowing in on a small number or a large number. And so doing things like we have a procurement financial assessment team. It's a dedicated finance group that helps to evaluate proposals. A lot of companies have things like that, or they partner with a finance group of some kind, and making sure that you're putting those sort of, it's not the price times quantity stuff. It's a TCO view, and it's a value proposition view as you're doing the analysis of how do I decide how many suppliers I should have, who I should get, and so on. Because there's things you can put in those financial models if you're paying attention to it that wouldn't necessarily be there, because a lot of people are making a decision, they're just going P times Q, right? Price times quantity. Well, that's not the whole picture. That's only part of it. And so I think that's a needed change that a lot of companies can embrace. The other thing is there's other policies, like, for example, we never, and again, we meaning the industry, we never want to be too big of a percentage of somebody's business, especially the large company, right? Because we don't want to accidentally put you out of business either. And so sometimes there's a need to have an exception process where, hey, there's this new innovative startup that fits our diversity goals and has this really cool technology that's business enabling, but they don't pass certain numbers that we have. We're too big a percent of the revenue. They don't have a long enough history there, whatever it is, right? There needs to be an exception process so that it's not just a math game, but rather you have a council, we call it a procurement review board. People have different names for it, but we have a bunch of decision makers we can bring together that says, this is the right decision to make, and it's within our policy, but it's people making a decision, not just a math game. And I think those are two, specific things that we can do, because remember, procurement has always in the past been about how much cost savings do I have? We are shifting and have shifted in some companies more than others, more towards what value do we provide? How do we create opportunities for the company? The more we get away from just cost being the metric to a balanced scorecard, and those decisions made around that balanced scorecard, we stop kind of some of the non-functional or less functional things that are holding back some suppliers being able to play.
Yeah, and so I think that's very, very key, and that kind of brings us. I know we're just at the half hour. Since we started a bit late, we're gonna just run a few minutes over, but I can assure our audience that we know it's late, especially on the East Coast. So we'll just take a few more minutes of your time, because I think there have been some excellent points made. But what I want to do now is go around the panel and just ask you to nail one key message. My ask is, if there was only one thing that you would want the participants to walk away with after this conversation, if you only could get one, what would it be? And Bree, I'm going to put you on the spot and start with you again.
Thanks, Karen. My company is called Lions and Tigers because it's a courage brand. And it feels like in these moments, when the system feels so big and unruly, that we have to call on this courage moment and really go out and ask. I actually just saw in chat that Chaitra asked Jason for a meeting to pitch her business. And I was like, go Chai. Like, these are the moments. Like, we have to ask, because we have beautiful, willing people on the other side of the table who might say yes. So that's what I'm going to take out of this.
Great. Thank you. Avaridis, let's go with you.
I love that. I was going to say, be persistent, and know your value. Don't be apologetic about it. Know your value, be persistent.
Jason, how about you?
Mine is engage, and specifically know your stakeholders, like Bree just talked about, right? Relationships get created based on understanding your relationships, and engage lifetime learning. Attending conferences like this allows you to continue to engage.
Lawrence?
Say build and leverage your network. You don't have to do things directly, and in some cases you can't, right? But you can partner up with others. And a lot of times it doesn't even, things can pay off in strange ways. Really short story to kind of bring that home. I was contacted by a company who it's a veteran-owned small business, and they have wounded combat veterans that they use for service desk type work. They're folks who can't travel much. Typically, they're fairly disabled, but they're able to do really value-added work around some of the things in IT, where the IT goes to them instead of them going to a site or whatever. And that's not something, the way they had set the organization up is not something we could do because of certain security and other data rules. However, I talked to a couple of folks at other companies who I happen to know, and one of them went, oh, we have a perfect need for this. We'll go talk to these guys. And I found out like a year later that they'd got a contract, had been going great, and just cruising along. So that was something where I didn't hire anybody. I just passed a name along from one person to another person, and it turned into a big opportunity. So don't be afraid of stuff like that, right? Most of us, it takes 5 minutes to ask and have an introduction. You never know where it'll lead. Sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't, but always try. Because, a lot of times you think you need to do it yourself. You don't always have to do it yourself. There's a lot of people out there that can help.
Thank you, Lawrence. A great comments by everyone on the panel. What I'm hearing is we really have to rely, as you've heard from Chaitra and from the Women in Cloud, on the collective. I'm still hearing that there's a tremendous amount of work to be done if we're really going to create an environment that allows diversity. I mean, I've heard that at this point in time, some of the key ways to be able to work with large corporates is through their strategic suppliers. So subcontract, be a partner. But the corporations then also have to take some accountability with it. They need to put the pressure on the strategic suppliers to have diversity. But it sounds like the corporations also need to think about what are some of the options. I think the panelists mentioned education, finding ways to have the mentorship that was mentioned, and the education. So, because trying to find an org chart to figure out who are the stakeholders, let me tell you, I mean, I found that difficult sometimes when I work for the company. So much less when you're outside, and having the different levels. I know that as CEO of a smaller company, I remember if I didn't get those accounts receivable, Lawrence mentioned the 30 days versus 120 days. If I didn't get my accounts receivable in 30 days, I remember driving home with a pit in my stomach on how the hell I was going to make payroll. Excuse my language. So I think that, these things are important, the education and getting, I think the point about don't want to be, not wanting to be too much a part of a single business, that is a big challenge. But I love the advice you all gave at the close to the suppliers. Be courageous, be persistent, engage so that you can find out your network, build and leverage your network, and find out ways to use that network, as Lawrence said, to get the help and the advice that you need. And this is a team of people that can help you with that. So I think shake your head. I think you all are open to people reaching out through LinkedIn to you. Is that correct? Yes?
Yes,
all right. And help.
Indeed.
Well, thank you very much, everyone. I'm going to, any last comment before I turn this back to Chaitra?
Thank you very much.
Good?
Thank you. Thank you, Karen.
Yeah, thanks, Karen.
Thank you.
Yes,
Chaitra,
thank you.
we're back to you.
Oh my God, that was the most fantastic conversation we had. So first is the art of asking, Bria. I was just showing how we do it well. If you do it well, we have a meeting, right? That's the whole intention. So first is, Jason, a couple of things that it stood out. So one is the whole trust your supplier. That is a great, great initiative, because as we are moving into the new world of procurement with cloud buying, the way you purchase software is very different. So that means you have to have different practices. So I'm hoping that you will incorporate and make it easier for women entrepreneurs to participate. So we are hoping that all the 30 companies will be our first test bed for the blue chip companies to work with us. The second thing I felt, we are still working in tweaking the old model rather than really rethinking the procurement processes, because the barriers around certification, insurance, and all the other biases that happens in contracting, we really need to rethink about that one. And I'm hoping all of you can really advance that narrative in the enterprise space. So for all the audience, so what did you learn from this power session? Go ahead and chat, because we want the audience, the panelists, to know. Take a moment and tell us, what did you learn that you plan to take action on? Yes, Geeta, good job. Perfect. So what I would like you to do is open your workbook and take time and write down the few things that you learned. Is what did you learn from this power session? And what would you do differently based on your learnings today? Okay. And what actions will you take based on your learning? And what kind of access do you need to take these actions successfully? So go ahead and share, write it down. You can share it in the chat. But the thing is that all the panelists did a fantastic job. The other thing we also have done is the Get Connected created. I'm hoping Emeritus, Jason, Lawrence, Karen, Bria, that people can reach out to you and we can make a warm introduction to you. Is that possible? You will say yes?
Yes, we
Come
can.
in.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Awesome. And the share kudos from experience. Please do give kudos. They're giving you volunteer time to be here with you and help you, provide you access to win the enterprise opportunities. And the last one is thank you to all our sponsors for making this possible. We are learning. The first day of the summit is over. I can tell you, as we learned a lot, probably all of you learned a lot. So we want to thank all the sponsors. And the last one is join us for tomorrow's session. Some few cool things waiting for you. The first one that I would say is the Women in Tech Executive Leadership Power Circle. If you want to get onto boards or a C-level position, you should be there. The second one is Microsoft Accelerate Digital Skilling for Economic Development. If you want to partner with them and explore how to enable digital skilling in your city, you should be there. The last one is Rock Your Pitch. It would be a pitch to ask for a meeting, or it could be a pitch for getting an interview. So go ahead and learn those skills, because Tucker and Patty will be there full of energy. So with that, the last announcement is the Cloud Accelerator is going to be live, and it's going to be starting in Feb. If any of the entrepreneurs are here interested to participate in the next accelerator, which starts in Feb, 20 seats, please go ahead and apply. That would be great. And other than that, thank you to all the panelists. You guys were great, and you ladies were amazing. Fantastic work. And we will see you tomorrow and have more fun and more conversation.